They were abused as children. Now these middle-aged men believe this is their last chance to unravel what they allege is a cover-up by security services going back decades. A High Court bid to investigate the real story of Kincora Boys' Home, not here in Belfast, but in London, and the UK inquiry chaired by Justice Goddard.
This has to go to the top. It has to go to Westminster. Westminster has the authority, they have the power, and they have most of the documents.
I just can't even get a night's sleep. It's just always in my head, things that happened to me.
In 1981, 3 senior staff at Kincora were convicted of sexually abusing 11 boys in their care. Joseph Mains, his assistant Raymond Semple, and the housefather William McGrath, the leader of an extreme loyalist movement called Tara. But attempts to establish the truth about British state collusion in what went on here have so far been blocked. It's been persistently alleged that William McGrath was an informant for British intelligence. But after 2 judge-led inquiries, MI5's involvement is still unclear. There were complaints about Kincora from as early as 1967, but the scandal didn't unravel until 1980.
I was just thinking of the other boys too.
Richard Kerr and other survivors are adamant the current historical abuse inquiry in Northern Ireland will not uncover what really went on inside these walls. Led by Sir Anthony Hart, it lacks the powers to force MI5 to hand over documents and cannot compel witnesses to testify. Colin Wallace is a former Army intelligence officer who blew the whistle more than 40 years ago. He, like the victims, are pushing for Kincora to be brought into the Westminster inquiry, something the Home Affairs Committee have also called for. He spent years trying to raise the alarm, speaking to his superiors, the press, but was cast as a fanciful Walter Mitty character. Time and time again, Parliament said they had no evidence that abuse was taking place in Kincora, but his warnings went to the very top.
This document was the...
Tonight, he reveals a letter he sent to Margaret Thatcher as late as 1990.
I think what information we did have in the 1970s was more than adequate to have brought a prosecution. I just find it so hard to believe why somewhere along the line the amazing security apparatus that we had in Northern Ireland in 1974, and it was really comprehensive, all the different agencies, why they failed to intervene to stop that at any point during those years.
In the 1970s, he was a rising star. Here he sits alongside Terence O'Neill, the Prime Minister of Northern Ireland. Officially, he was a senior information officer in the MOD, but he was also working as a member of the ultra-secret Army Psychological Operations Unit, attempting to control and infiltrate paramilitary groups. That led him to Kincora. In 1973, he briefed journalists in the hope they would start investigating, but it didn't work. The following year, increasingly exasperated, the army and police were aware of the abuse claims, but nothing was being done. He sent a memo to his superiors, appealing to them to take action. Dated the 8th of November 1974, it reads,
I find it very difficult to accept that the RUC consistently failed to take action on such serious allegations unless they had specifically received some form of policy direction. Such direction could only have come from a very high political or police level. If the allegations are true, then we should do everything possible to ensure that the situation is not allowed to continue. The youngsters in these hostels almost certainly come from problem families, and it is clear that no one will fight their corner unless we do.
Well, bearing in mind we're dealing with the army and the police, they themselves had a lot of authority. It is virtually impossible for any organisation to stop a chief constable or indeed a senior police officer from doing their duty. And I can only conclude, therefore, that whoever did stop action being taken had to have considerably more power. And in the context of Northern Ireland, that must have been from London. I can think of no one in Northern Ireland who had that level of authority.
Colin was vilified, discredited and wrongly jailed for manslaughter. The conviction was later quashed. He always maintained he had told the authorities boys were being abused from the early 1970s, but those allegations were dismissed. Then, in 1990, Margaret Thatcher admitted that her government had misled Parliament and the public about Wallace's role, but she didn't address the issue of child abuse. A few months later, he wrote this letter, shared with Channel 4 News for the first time.
Instead of the positive response promised by ministers, each of my letters has been fobbed off with absurd excuses. Despite the assurances given to Parliament that previous errors in ministerial statements have been corrected, the government is still misleading the House over those issues.
Just months after Colin left Northern Ireland, this man, Richard Kerr, now living in America, entered Kincora. Colin says if his warnings were acted on, Richard and many other boys could have been saved from years of sexual abuse. It took 7 years since he first raised the alarm for the home to close.
Richard has lived here for more than 20 years, but it's only really in the past 12 months that he's found the strength to speak out about what happened to him in his early life. He says he feels safer in Dallas, but he's still very anxious at this stage to reveal all.
He came here hoping to start afresh. The shadow of the Kincora scandal, though, still rests heavy on him.
I'm angry at the authority figures, the people above them, knowing that this was going on. That's where my anger is. To those who turned a blind eye, to those children and me. Turned a blind eye because they believed they could get away with it.
Have you received specific threats about speaking out?
I received threats back in 1980 and 1979. Reliable sources are telling me that I need to stop talking.
Despite the fact Colin's career and life were destroyed for many years, he says he doesn't regret what he tried to expose.
I genuinely believe I did my best, but I also feel very sad that I wasn't able to do more. My job, don't forget, was helping to fight terrorism. Kincora was a small but fairly stressful sideline, and I found it frustrating more than anything else because it should have been very easy to resolve, and I suppose I still grates with me that we weren't able to do more than we did do.
He became one of the biggest whistleblowers of his generation. Like the victims, he firmly believes this is the last opportunity to establish if there was an MI5 cover-up that allowed boys to be abused in Kincora to protect intelligence.
I've been through life with not trusting anybody. I don't get involved with anybody. That is why I'm 57, never been married, no children, and that is, I'm just an ordinary guy. I wanted the same things that everybody else had, and I just had to look at it from outside.
What would you say to those looking on in Westminster today?
Let us have our day in the sunshine. You know, we're getting old, so draw a line under this.
And if a line isn't drawn, they fear they could remain on the outside, the state's alleged role in their troubled past covered up forever.